Welcome everybody to a conversation I always love to have. And if you guys could see a snapshot into the Marco Polos that Murray and I send back, and some of the esoteric conversations we have and the practical conversations about life in God. I've got a dear friend here. We're going to talk about the topic of transformation. You know, we're gearing up towards the release of a new book, Transformation, Catching a Glimpse of the Beauty of God. And my dear friend, Murray Dueck, he's long time training, equipping in not just prophetic ministry, but that's one of the things he's known for, but living a spiritual life, and coining a great phrase. Murray coins the phrase, if this were a dream, what would it mean? Yeah. And I mean, you hear the phrase, you don't even need to read the book, because the title of the phrase is such a captivating title. It kind of carries the essence of the book.
I think that phrase might have come down from the big guy. It seems above my pay grade to come up with something like that.
Yeah, it's a great one. So this is my dear friend Murray, runs Samuel's Mantle, a prophetic, equipping, life in God, living a spiritual life ministry. I don't want to characterize it as only a prophetic equipping ministry, because it's so much more than that. But that's kind of sometimes the camp that we get thrown into, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes I think Murray and I tend to butt against things that we don't necessarily need to butt against.
Very true. I would say that's very true.
So Murray's just a dear friend, and so I thought Murray, he's almost done reading the book, and you know, we're a month and a half out from the release. So he's one of the guys he's read it, and we've been talking about it. And so I thought Murray is in his in his own right, let's think through the system of what it looks like for God to come to us and transform us. And so just a fantastic resource. So I thought, let's have a conversation. And I want to hear I want you to hear, and I want to hear some of how Murray characterizes what it means to be formed by God. So Murray, tell us a little bit about yourself and what's going on in your life.
All right. Well, currently I'm house sitting a lamb who is sleeping over there by the fire wearing a diaper.
Deeply spiritual thing.
That's right. You know, it's Easter, it's the Lamb of God. So
yeah,
esoteric. The reason Josh and I go back and forth on Marco Polo, it's because I'm like, Josh, help me. I need theological help. So yeah, Josh and
I go, by the way, Murray, I'm reading this really weird Orthodox thing. So here, check out what they were talking about 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, right? You got to hear this.
Yeah, and then I'm like, that's awesome. And everyone else is like, why? You don't understand. So, but that's transformation for you. You kind of get it as you go along. So yeah, so again, my name's Murray Dueck, and I run a ministry called Samuel's Mantle, and it is a prophetic school, but don't get too hung up on that word. It just means learning how to hear God speak, right? And giving it away, right? Because we all want to learn how to hear, but that's the word the Bible uses, prophecy, right? Eagerly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. So, I had to think about it early on. If I really wanted to use that word, should I call it that? Should I just call it listening prayer? That was already taken though, actually. But I thought, because we can make it about the end times, we can make it about the devil, we can make it about our vision, we can make it about all kinds of stuff. But as Jesus would say, to bring us back on topic, or Paul says in Ephesians 1, I pray God would give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation. Why? To know the glorious Father. Yeah. Right? What's the point of it? To have a relationship. And we want this. I think that burns in people's hearts. I know him, but how intimate can you be with your spouse if you can't hear or her, right? So my goal is to help people know their spouse better. If I wanted to break it down to what I do, and then how to grow up into that, which would be, transformation, transition. How do you grow up in that? Because, we have a different relationship with someone, or parents, for example, as a toddler to a preteen, to a teenager, to an adult, our relationship changes. And we want to walk this listening journey. The language changes. What's revealed is changed. The depth of the communication changes. We could say that's all prophecy. We could say that's all flow, but what's its purpose? To know the glorious Father. Right. And that's the burning issue in my heart, that people would grow up in the Lord, but be able to hear and walk. I think that's what the Lord wants,
Yeah. The term prophecy, like if you break apart the Greek word and you look in the Strongs and parse it all out, right? It's the compound word of pro and fetus. And it literally means something like this when you jumble it all together. Like, it's not one of the things that gets mischaracterized when you hear the term prophecy is we're predicting the future, right?
Exactly.
But when you break that word apart and actually investigate what it really means, it means to speak on behalf of another. And in order for me to speak on behalf of another, I have to know what the other would speak for Murray, who's just referencing the whole issue of helping people know their spouse. For me to, and the analogy, of course, of knowing God, for me to communicate to you what my spouse is saying, I have to hear what my spouse is saying. And so just the very nature of the word itself implies relational connection with the one who's speaking. And so I'm relatively convinced, not even relatively convinced, I'm thoroughly convinced that the role of a prophet, looking at scripture and then looking at church history and looking at today, the role of a prophet is not to predict the coming of future events. That might be one element, but it's more of a minor element. The role of a prophet is to look at the culture and pull out what the Father is doing and point people back to that place, and to say, and to give a critique that gives hope, that says, this is where we can go, guys. And so the future element is like, our destination is him, right? That's the future element. But realistically, it is like, I love Abraham Heschel in his work on prophets. He said that the prophet, the distinct characteristic of the prophet is to be in the pathos of God.
Oh my, that's awesome.
And which is absolutely fascinating. And so with that said, Murray, one of the questions I want to ask you, just because we track so much on this kind of stuff, what this is a big question. And so I don't expect you to be able to narrow it down to a one sentence answer. And that's okay. I want to get you talking.
Getting kind of nervous now.
To you, what does it mean to experience God? To experience his heart? That phrase, Moses tells us in Numbers, I think it's Numbers 11, says, when the Spirit is poured out on the 70 elders, right? And 2 of them are outside of the camp and they're prophesying and they go, we should stone those guys. They're not part of us. And Moses says, oh, that the spirit of prophecy would be poured out on all God's people and they all would prophesy. Thinking about that in light of Abraham Heschel's statement that all of us are destined to be in the pathos of God, the feeling of God, the heart of God. Yeah. So what does that mean? What does it mean to experience God? What does it mean to know his heart? How, bleh.
Yeah, it's going to come down, because it's going to fit into the other questions, and really we're going to pull on this old Augustine quote, right? Know thyself, know God, right? We're going to head that way, but it's funny for me. I mean, the reason I do what I do goes back. I'm not going to share the experience; it's too long, and you can find it on other places, like the Samuel's Mantle Facebook page. I mean, I was a real suicidal basket case when I was 18, 19. And I went to Youth of the Mission, and God spoke to me. I mean, I was a good Mennonite kid. I really hadn't seen people raise their hands before. And I think I had some prophetic gifting already. But you know what? When I was younger, I mean, I went to a Mennonite high school, believe it or not. And I had this ability, and I don't know, and I'm going to just throw this in there. And I could meet my high school girlfriend's friends, and I could tell her under one meeting everything about them, and it was always bad. This one's full of pride, this one's this, but I was always right, 100%. And I'm like, how do I do that? That must be a spiritual gift, and I'm like, but when I mean, it had partly to do with the family I grew up in, having a mindset like that. But when I went to Youth of the Mission, and God spoke to me and told me he loved me and that he knew me, and this love filled me. And for the first time in my life, I felt love, and it was connected to me to hearing God's voice. And I never experienced love like that. I didn't grow up in a family that was affectionate, or, my good Mennonite upbringing is love equals work, right? So all of a sudden that, and you think, well, God's like that. I just have to work. When you meet God, he's not like that. He is Abba, as Jesus's description. Those words, when you meet him, when you read, becomes very, very different. I mean, I'd read that in the Bible before and it had no meaning to me, but suddenly when you realize he is a father and he reveals himself that way, and he wants to reveal himself that way. And if people could hear him, they would love him. That if I had to sum up why I started Samuel's Mantle, if people could hear him, they would love him, because to know him is to know love. If you have an encounter with God, you can't help but being overwhelmed to know that you are eternal, that you are known before time, that God is always thinking about you, like Psalm 139 says, that his eyes are always on you. To experience God is to experience that. And you know what? I would come back to my Mennonite church friends, and they didn't want to talk about any of this stuff because to them, not having that experience. When you talk about hearing God, they think judgment, my sin's going to be revealed, right? I remember I went out for coffee. Somebody wanted me to meet the dean of this Mennonite Bible college, like a Baptist Bible college. And we're sitting over coffee. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He'd always go, hey, how are you doing? And he wouldn't look at me and just smile. And I realized the reason he was doing that, he thought I could see his sin, right? That's what he was thinking. But why did he think that? Because he thinks prophecy is looking at somebody's sin and bringing it out. But if you don't have an encounter with God, that's what you think it is, because you don't know, right? But if you encounter him, you begin to realize when it says God is love, you could sum up the whole New Testament right there, pretty much. And you know what? When you're in love, you don't want to sin. Like I remember one of the Desert Fathers saying, if you get married, you have a new bride, you could walk into the smelliest, garbage-filled area of the city. You wouldn't even smell it. You wouldn't even experience it, because the love you're experiencing would be so powerful. You wouldn't encounter it, right? And to all the prophetic people focusing on the devil, I would say that's the kind of love you need, and that's the Father you will meet if you get to know him and he reveals himself to you. And that's what prophetic gifting should be. I pray you would get a spirit of wisdom and revelation, that you would know. I think that's Adam knew Eve there. I think that's the translation of the word "knew," the glorious Father, right? And to know the Father is, it transforms, and it puts a hunger in you to never give up. There's always more. And it's funny that every time you get a taste of God, you want more of it. Like the first time you get prophesied over, like that, you want that to happen all the time. The first time you get healed, you want to go to conferences about healing. The first time you realize dreams are for today, you want to dream more. The first time, right? Getting a touch of God puts a seed in you that continues to grow throughout your life into eternity, right? And the more that you meet this God and encounter him, that more that fire burns inside of you. And I think most of us have that. If we got saved, we have this 8 months of glory, right? Or we have one of these encounters, but they grow continually, and you transform as these encounters continue to happen throughout your lifetime. And you become like Christ. We with unveiled faces, we behold his glory, and we're changed. Transformation, metamorphosis, right, is the word there. And so to encounter God is to know, love, and be known. But at the same time, as you begin this journey, you change, you become like him. And there's this transformation process. And, I remember John Wimber, and I think John Arnott too, say, God loves us the way we are, but he loves us too much to leave us the way we are. Right. Which brings us back to our topic of what, this love of God, what does it do? It's a fire that's insatiable, and we can put it out. I really do think that, I know so many people I went to Youth of the Mission with, and we all came back to the same Mennonite churches, and a lot of them just kind of went back to the way they used to do things. And I could never understand how you could do that. But, if you hear him, it's hard to go back and do that, rather than you just take a class. And taking a class isn't bad, but the hunger to know him changes you in your heart, in your spirit. But to just read about it in a book gives you an ability to go, yeah, I agree with that, but it doesn't really change you. And that's part of your book too. And I've seen that happen so often where people will come back and they've taken these courses, but not had a deep heart change, right? That it's so easy then under peer pressure or their culture or the needs to go, well, I guess it doesn't work, or it's going to cost too much, or but in the end, that pushing through that encounter, that's what gets you through, right? That's what causes you. And again, I think we have that, but we need to steward it. If it's from when we get saved or we go to a conference or just sitting and reading our Bible and God warms our heart with his word, that these things need to be stewarded. And then transformation begins to take place. But long answer to one question. So,
well, it's a good answer. Well, it's an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, but it's good thoughts. It's, one of the things that it makes me think about is one of the sayings of Anthony the Great, where he says, I no longer fear God, I only love him, for perfect love casts out all fear. And even that, looking at the process, like Basil the Great envisioned a process that someone comes to when it comes to knowing the heart of God, and serving God really is his language. And he says someone generally starts out in a place of fear. They serve God out of fear of punishment. This is the slave mentality. And he says a lot of people start off there, and then some people move into the servant mentality where what am I getting out of this? And so I come to my servanthood to God because I'm going to get something out of this thing. And he says, and then the final stage he envisions as the son or the daughter who serves a father in order to bring pleasure to the father. And so he envisions this progression through these different stages, but you can serve out of fear, you can serve out of hope for gain, or you can serve out of love for the father. And it seems to me that as we go through that process of transformation, and many of us, we started in a place of fear, right? A good, like you had mentioned, being the good Mennonite boy, right? Starting in the place of fear, but coming into that place of love. If you don't have how can you have love as the locus for your life if you never were touched by that love? It's absolutely. And then furthermore, how can you define, because a lot of what you and I do in the sense, and I loved how you said you started Samuel's Mantle because you just thought if people could just hear the Father, they would recognize how loved they were. And that is so much of the transformation book, the backdrop is to help prophetic people know what it looks like to move into a place of deep love and deep appreciation, because the locus point for us for prophetic ministry has been retribution, has been judgment, has been wrath, or has been our own anxiety over what's going to happen in the future, as opposed to how are we revealing the absolute radical joy the Father has over his bride, or the Son has over the bride, the Father has over the Son, or the Spirit has in indwelling us. And I had this thought the other day, Murray, and I'm just curious what you think about this. And I'll try and communicate this succinctly. If you were able to be raised in an environment completely free from fear, and think Garden of Eden, right? Every animal that would ever come to you would not be threatening to you because you were given a relationship to those things. You could speak their language in the sense that you could name them and have personal ownership over them. So you could be walking in the forest and a twig could snap and you would never think, oh no, right? You would think, who is it? Right? So your entire focus of life had never been touched by fear. If that had been the case, right? That person could never you have an autonomic nervous system, right? That learns to respond to fear. Your senses are heightened, your blood pressure goes up, your vessels constrict so you can pay attention to things, all that stuff. You would never learn that kind of response, right? In a fear-free environment. But then conversely, if you were raised in an environment full of fear, right, which many people have been, to a certain degree, right? Some people, I mean, think of kids right now that are growing up in a place like Ukraine. They're growing up in the middle of a war. They're growing up in a very impoverished environment. And so they grow up with a certain level of fear that in the West, we generally don't know, right? Or a child that grows up with a father that is abusive or a mother that's abusive, right? There's fear is always present in the home. That person, I don't think, and here's my point, I don't think you could keep that person from learning joy. As twisted as that joy may be, no amount of fear could ever keep a person from learning what joy is, because they'll find joy in something. Whether it's even the fact that their abusive parent would look at them and smile, they'll find joy in that. I don't think you could ever I think you can keep a human being from learning fear, but I don't think you could ever keep a human being from learning joy. And so which one is more natural to the human? Is it fear or is it joy? Because we think fear is very natural to the human being, but I think given the proper conditions, if it was possible, which I don't think it is possible in a fallen world, but if it were possible, say Garden of Eden, you would never learn fear, but you could never stop the learning of joy. Which if we just thought about that and said joy is a absolute integral part of the human experience, and it is not because it's absent from the Father, and it's not because we stumble into it, would be really interesting what that would do to our models for prophetic ministry, for hearing God, that kind of stuff.
And my answer is yes. That's the short answer. Wow, what a question. One, I would have to quit. I wouldn't have to spend any money on clothes. That would be cool.
Because you're in the Garden of Eden, you just need nothing because you're naked and unashamed.
As long as everyone else was also in the garden and had the same mindset, it was just. Then the Emperor,
I like where your mind goes.
Yeah, sorry, I was just like thinking really practical there.
Yeah, I just want to point out, okay, I just super deep theological reflection, and Murray says, well, I wouldn't have to wear any clothes. So
that's just how I roll. That was a no clothes humor part. I think that if that were true, then I would be able to see God standing in front of me right now with absolutely no problem or blocks.
Yeah,
I think that would be true. Because blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And if I didn't have all that fear, and I understand fear, I think we all dwell in fear. And I'll give you a real today example, if that's okay, right? Just something. So we have this animal rescue farm, and we take care of all these animals. One of the things we do, and the little lamb Blue over there just woke up, and he is like, please feed me. Interesting timing. And he might come wandering over here, and we need to get a tractor. So we pulled this off for about 3 years with no tractor, and by faith, we're doing great. God's taking care of us, but I need to get a tractor, and I'm just going to use this as a issue. Like, how can fear be involved in that? How? Well, Jesus said, was it Matthew? You have to tell me the verse, 18, 15, come to me, learn of me, take up my yoke, rest, right? It's
in Matthew. You're right.
I was hoping you'd narrow it down a little more than that, but I guess that's okay. We'll let you get away with that. I know it's 28. I just can't remember the chapter for some 11, I think.
I want to say 11 or 12, something like that.
So, because of COVID, because of the computer chip shortage, because of all kinds of stuff, used tractor. I saw a used tractor the other day, $28,000, leaks oil, air conditioner's broken, heater's broken, otherwise in good shape for $28,000. I'm like, what? So I'm looking to ship something in from Saskatchewan, but it's $5,000 by rail, by semi truck, or by something new or fairly new. And that's expensive. It's like 30 grand, 40 grand probably. So I have to kind of go through this. Well, if I buy something old, who's going to fix it? Because if they don't make those parts anymore, I have no mechanic skills. I'm hooped, right? But if I buy something new, that's a big payment every month. Okay. And so either way, I've got some fear issues here. Either way, I'm going to buy something cheap because economically that's better because I want to feed the animals. But if that thing breaks down, it's probably $15,000 for an engine job. So, am I saving money? On the other hand, if I buy something new, you see, I get a warranty, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, and you know what? I can't hear an answer because I'm afraid. And one, my God bless us, all us minnows, my cheap minnow save money part says, buy the cheap thing, right? But I know where that could go because I've been down that road before, with blown engines and the other part of me says, wow, maybe it'd be nice to have something new. But I'm like, no, well, I can't do that because, well, what a waste of money. Am I doing that just because I want to get a rush out of have something new? I don't want to do that either. So I don't want it. So I'm totally stuck. Why am I stuck? I'm afraid. I'm afraid on both of those things. And because of that, am I hearing God on this issue right now? No, I'm not. Because I'm afraid. I can't get into the presence of the Lord because I can't get past my own fear. Because I'm afraid if I get it wrong, what it's going to cost the family, what it's going to cost the money, what if I'm doing it for my own ego? What if I'm doing it out of fear? And it drives me crazy, and I'm working through it. I think I'm almost through it, but I realize how just something so simple as a purchase, how much fear there can be involved just by going around and around. And I need what do I need? I need joy. I need the presence of the Lord. I need to be there. Not so I can figure it out with my brain to deal with my emotions. I need to get in presence so that I can joyfully look at these things from the presence. But because of my fallen nature and fear and wanting to fight or flight, I'm stuck a little bit right now. But that's my human experience on buying property, of confronting my brother when they need confrontation, of what material should I teach? Am I going to get enough clients? It's a daily thing all the time. And the human experience is learning how to navigate this fallen, broken world. Because, really, is this no different than Adam when God shows up and he's hiding and he goes, what have you done? If I spend money on this tractor that I shouldn't have had, am I going to see God looking at me with the eyes going, what have you done? Right? Or am I going to have him go, you're living in a poverty mentality. What have you done? Am I not hiding in the woods bush right here in fear? Absolutely I am. And I do it every day. So if you're telling me I get the opportunity to go back to the Garden of Eden, I get a new tractor. That's how that works as far as I can see. That's awesome. But what it means is I can hear God relationally without all this stuff. This job of transformation is to work through all these things, the results of the fall and how it's affected mankind. And as we transform from glory to glory, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. As we work through these things, and I look at the course I teach, I'm still working through it, and I'll get through it. It'll be fine. God will change me in the process. Come to me, learn of me. I will give you rest. I'm going to get there. But to say that all gets to disappear and we get to go back, none of that head knowledge, none of that noise, none of those emotions, none of that having to second guess, wondering if, it would be heaven on earth, but isn't that Revelations? If you think about it, that last scene of Revelations, like the Jews don't have the term Garden of Eden, they call it paradise. And then of course, when you look at the thief on the cross, Jesus says to him, today you'll be with me in paradise, right? And then you get right to the end of Revelations. There's the tree of life growing by the river, the same tree as in the garden. It's in paradise. And it says, and the curse is broken. They're no longer, that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is what it's talking about. The curse is broken and they shall see God. What happens? Face to face. So when this is all gone, that's what we get. Face to face encounter with God without all this stuff. And that's the longing of the heart of God. That's how the book ends, as a bridal relationship. And this is taken out of mankind, and he will wipe away every tear.
Well, and it seems to me
it's a beautiful thing, right?
It seems to me that what happens in our transactional way of approaching a relationship with God, as opposed to deep covenant commitment, right? Where when I enter into the joy, and one of the things that I've been thinking about lately too is I'll get back to my thought in a second if I can
I'll
remember.
just throw out this one thought. That joy to me is the Garden of Eden, is this heavenly future Garden of Eden leaking into mankind now. Cross. It's coming now. The transformation of the kingdom is now.
Yeah.
And we can go now if we walk this pattern, if we walk this transition.
Yeah.
This is what we become. I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's why what I love about what you're saying is that the joy is not so much a transactional quality of God that says, because he's joyful, I should buy the bigger tractor.
Yeah.
It's because I recognize that joy is the expression of the Father. It frees me from the burden of fear, and I can actually make a decision because I recognize I'm not afraid of disappointing him or the judgment of his for making the wrong decision or whatever. But once I
kid who doesn't get it, criticizing myself, fear of God, the two coins, you get it either way when the enemy has
exactly. Yes. But as I grasp that, no, my life, the focal point of my life now is joy in the Father. I'm actually free to make a decision without, not so much I make the decision without fear of reprisal, but reprisal doesn't even come into the equation because I'm just making a decision and walking with the Father before the decision and after the decision. Right. And I think the Father's going, on some level in situations like that, such a practical situation, is going, I'm okay with whatever you do. Right.
It's quite funny that he often, I had a weird, I'll give you two quickly, but the second one would be interesting to hear what you'd say about it. But I had to speak at this outdoor conference once the church was doing. And I didn't know. I mean, the speaker was coming. I was just going to be, I usually did the ministry times in the church. So I was pretty comfortable doing prophetic ministry. But this guy, I thought he was going to do it. So he shows up to do it. And he goes, oh, by the way, I don't do ministry times. Right. And we're like 15 minutes till we start. Right. So the pastor goes, you're doing the ministry times. I'm like, what? I'm not ready. I didn't pray. And I'm like, so I go for this walk and I'm like, should I do it? Should I do it? And the devil goes, what a chicken. Like, I'm not going to do it. He goes, what a chicken. You're such a chicken. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And he goes, you're so proud. You're so proud. I'm like, what? If I don't do it, I'm a chicken. If I do it, I'm proud. I go, Lord, help. And he just says, what would a little child do? A little child wouldn't ask those questions. A little child would just play. Go play. Right? Because there's no fear in play. And that whole thought of, unless you become like a little child, that's, kind of what we're talking about, the joyful encounter with the Lord and the protection of a childlike heart. And in that I could hear, I went to minister, I could hear really clearly once I got past that. Right. And, but to bring us back there and just in what you said, like sometimes the Lord's like, I love your decision. It'd be interesting to see what people think about this or what you think about this. I had a lady in class and she says, could you pray for me? I'm thinking about, I think it was buying a house over here or moving to this side of town. I'm like, okay. So, I listened and I said, this is my sense. And she goes, well, I've kind of changed my mind. I think instead I'm going to move over here and do this. Okay. Could you pray about that? Okay. And I felt the Lord say, yeah, that's a great idea. You can do that. Move over here. And then I went back and she changed her mind again. And the Lord says, well, and he said, yeah, you could do that. And I'm like, Lord, why do you keep changing your mind? I thought this was prophecy. So when you say a word, aren't we supposed to do it? And he goes, no, actually, I'm just having a conversation with my daughter and telling her that I like her decisions and it's totally fine. And sometimes I think we can make prophecy. Once I hear it, I better do it because I've heard it. And now I must move here and I must, instead of like, oh, you want to do that? Well, oh, you want to change your mind? Well, how about this? How about this? And I'm like, wow, what's so relational, so kind, And when we think it's a new set of laws that come down, again, that's a fear-based response. And instead of like, I'm in a conversation with dad, and sometimes he can say, no, do the first one. So don't get me wrong, everybody. He might say that, right? But sometimes he's like, you're growing up. I trust you. What do you want to do? And I think he does ask us that because that's a loving question of trust. And that really surprised me when that happened. But the Lord's response, no, I just want to have a conversation with my daughter. This is fun. I'm like, wow, like really? Brilliant,
He actually likes us.
Yeah.
He likes one of the things that I had this thought I was considering the other day, another thought. welcoming you into the thoughts of Josh.
I was going to say we're way off our question page.
Way off of them. Yeah. The thought was, it's funny that as soon as you start majoring on the love of God in the sense of what you talk about, right?
Yeah.
And that everybody gets suspicious that you somehow departed from scripture.
Yes. Oh, too much grace. Oh, I don't know.
You're like, I remember one time I was going, God, but what if you talk about grace all the time? And isn't just going to give license for sin? And then God said, what if hedonism isn't the only option? And I went, oh,
what a nice
I didn't consider that, right? The only option is one or the other, right? It's just A or B. It's either, you don't talk about grace and everybody's too scared to do anything wrong. You do talk about grace, everybody's going to go off and sleep with each other and have orgies naked, right? And it's like, he's like, what if hedonism's not the only option? And I was like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. It's like, it strikes me.
Where did that conversation go from there? That's brilliant.
It went a number of different ways, because the conversation to me was so freeing.
Yeah.
In the sense that, I can talk about the grace of God and the outcome will not be license to sin. The outcome could be transformation. I could talk about as one of the through lines for the transformation book is right in the subtitle, right? Catching a glimpse of the beauty of God. That I don't think transformation happens apart from that. And I love in the book, I use the example of Isaiah in Isaiah 6, when he sees the Lord high and lifted up and the train of his robe fills the temple. And he goes, I'm undone, but here I am and send me, right? Wow. All in one interaction. He sees something incredible. His life is undone. He's reconstituted and he finds mission and vision and passion for the rest of his life. And language to articulate that, all because he had he saw something beautiful that was unconveyable in language, because he never describes what God looks like on the throne. He just says, there he is. Wow. And I saw him there. And so I don't know that you can experience transformation absent seeing the beauty of God, because absent all of that, it's I'm afraid of disappointing someone. And so I'm going to change certain parameters in my life. But then it's just like any New Year's resolution, right? I'd make a New Year's resolution to try and change, but if I haven't found the impetus to drive change beyond just the strength of my will, nothing's going to change. And unless I've accessed fear at such a deep level, like maybe, I had a cancer scare or something like that, right? Then maybe I'll make some changes there, but that's only because fear has sustained it enough that my life has been threatened. But seeing something so beautiful and so lovely and so transformative, maybe the response is not license to sin or hedonism. Yeah. Maybe the response is just like, the first time I caught a vision of the beauty of my wife, right? But
I was like, example myself.
I was like, oh, I want this, right? Everything started changing in my life, right? Because I found something I would pursue. And before that, nothing changed around that. Nothing had reoriented around that. But as soon as it did, I went, oh, right? And you change everything.
Yeah.
To get there.
I remember one of the Desert Fathers says, I wish I remember everybody's name so I could quote it right, but he says, the heart is like a bowl of soup. And your only job is to keep it hot. If it gets cold, the flies get in, right? If you keep it hot, it drives them away. Your only job is to keep your heart hot. So, you might hear some bye.
That's good. I heard it. Wonderful.
What he's doing. So I'm a little bit.
Very biblical. There's buying in the background.
Yeah. It's prophetic. It's a prophetic sign. So, it's funny. Like, if you think about that whole grace thing, like again, St. Augustine said, love God and do what you want. And what kind of trouble? But think about it like this.
You can't say that.
Yeah, like, wow, that's pretty risky. But you got to really think about the heart being hot. And the best way to think about that again is the marriage example, which Jesus himself uses. John the Baptist uses it about him. When he's baptizing more than John the Baptist, the Pharisees or somebody says, "Aren't you concerned?" No, the friend of the bridegroom, right? He rejoices, right? And then they ask Jesus, why don't your disciples fast? Well, that you don't fast when the bridegroom's with you. So he, he uses this comparison, and if you think about what he's saying there, if let's say you're just hanging out with some girl, and you're not really dating her, you're just kind of hanging out. You can go hang out with any other girl you want to, right? You don't care. There's not enough love in your heart to make that commitment, right? Love isn't driving. But let's say you start dating, and let's say you give her an engagement ring. You can't help yourself. The next day after you give the engagement ring, do you go date somebody else? No way. You're so excited. You're so in love. There's no freaking way you're going to do that. You're going to protect that girl. You're going to protect that relationship. Why? Because you're so madly in love. There's not some rule book now saying you better not go and do such and such. No, love is pushing you to do it, to protect your children, to love your spouse too. Perfect love casts out fear. Why do we love others? If you know the love of God like that, you don't want to sin. It would break your beloved's heart. It would break your heart. Why do you not do it? Because you love, because you have that kind of connection. And when you have that kind of connection, you don't need law like that, right? Because in here, you have a relationship. And that's when we talk about grace, that's what we're talking about. And then if people do like, oh, I have grace, I can do whatever you want. Well, obviously, you have not met the God of love to make a statement like that. Maybe you still need, like Basil says, maybe you're still kind of the slave master relationship, because you're definitely not thinking out of a son paradigm there to even be able to comprehend making a statement like that, right? So anyway,
that's I mean, we could talk about this forever.
Josh and I might do a podcast, and you can tell we should be making notes, because this is gonna
this will definitely be a topic to revisit. So Murray, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your friendship. I love being friends with you. It's wonderful. So we're going to draw this conversation to a close. I'm sure Murray and I, once we hit stop recording, we'll just keep talking about it, because that's
probably we didn't even do the questions on the page.
Yeah, no, we didn't. We just talked about the love of God. But what better conversation to have than the love of God and encountering His grace? And so
I just want to make a little push, because I'm reading through Josh's book right now, and we did cover thoughts in it, and it's brilliant. It really is. I'm going to look right into the camera when I say it. It really is. There needs to be more writing on transformation, because we're in the process of becoming the bride of Christ. I want a bride spotless and clean, and what this prophetic life, this life of hearing God, it should draw this out of us. How do we walk that? How do we do that? What we're talking about, this love. If you're saying I would like that too, then you're on a process of transformation, because in your heart you want it. You can't be drawn near to God unless He draws you. So therefore, He's the one doing that, and that is His voice to you, which means you're in transformation. Which I'm so glad this book is being written, and I would recommend you guys when it comes out, read it, because it's really good. And his footnotes are fabulous. I'm going to steal them myself, because they're not really his footnotes. So I can, Father Moses. Oh yeah, I'm taking that book.
They're quotes. Yeah. Thank you, Murray, for saying that. That's so kind. So
that's true.
Yeah, well, for everybody that's watched this, we hope this was a blessing. And so we just bless you to encounter the love of God and find your own journey of transformation into His image. And so I know Murray well enough to know that that's his heart, and everything he does is that we would all look more like Him and bear His image into creation, that other people would bear His image. And in so doing, the whole world will be won to the loving, tender kindness of the Father. And so we bless you all to do that. Okay, until next time.